This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks. So Ben has up the agenda for today. We are going to start with some reports and finish up with an important conversation about where we're headed for the winter next year, and discuss the drought plan activation and next steps about just making sure that we have all the right conversations in motion to prepare everyone the best we can for what's to come. So just taking a look at the list here. Do we have someone from the Colorado Climate Center on? I'm having trouble seeing names.
Yep, this is Peter.
Oh, hey Peter. Looking forward to your presentation today. And are you good with starting off? Do you need a few minutes to get organized?
I am good to go.
Okay. So just a reminder for everyone to just type into the chat who you're here with. And Peter, I think you can take controls now, or you already have them. Great.
Yeah, are you seeing the have a great meeting screen?
Sure am.
Okay, that is what I want actually. So when I go to present mode, we'll go back to that slide. All right, it should be on the title slide now. It's still, for me, showing on the soil moisture slide.
Yeah, I see the soil moisture.
Yeah, let's just give me a minute here.
Okay.
Huh.
And while Peter's working on that, if folks are able to stay to the end, I would really like to just tee up a conversation about what a municipal task force might look like and making sure that our water providers are supported this year. So if you can hang on towards the end, I know it's a Friday, but it'll be an important conversation. And thanks for being here.
I do have a clarification question. It looked like on the meeting agenda, I was only allotted 15 minutes. Is that correct, or is that a typo?
I'll just go ahead and blame that one on Ben. That's a typo.
Yeah, sorry, Peter.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's all good. I'll go for the normal 25-30 minutes then. So yeah, thanks for having me with you. This is Peter with the Colorado Climate Center. Today I'm going to give a short update on the 2020 water year, some of our final statistics, and then I'll go ahead and jump into some of the more current conditions, and then we'll conclude with an outlook for winter, mainly talking about La Nina and what that could potentially mean for the coming months. So let's see here. Okay, there we go. Slides are advancing, that's great. So this is a zoomed out look at the contiguous US for water year 2020 statewide average temperature ranks. The 114 just means we were the 114th coolest year out of 125 years. So it was the 12th warmest year on record for Colorado going back to 1895. These warm temperature anomalies took place more during the summer than the winter. The winter of water year 2020 was actually pretty near normal for a lot of the state, and it started cold with last October being one of our coldest Octobers on record, but then we ended up being much warmer than normal late in the water year in July, August, September timeframe. All right, here is a map of how that broke out spatially across the state of Colorado. Some pretty large pockets of the west slopes, particularly down near the San Juans, seeing top 10th percentile temperature rankings for the water year 2020. Some areas further out on the eastern plains seeing near normal or below normal. I wouldn't pay too much attention to the temperature anomalies in North Park and South Park. I do think that this product has some problems with calculating anomalies over really sharp gradients in topography. So oftentimes you'll see that the mountain valleys are biased a little cool and the mountain ridges are biased a little warm. But I do buy the more large scale patterns in this product, such as it was a by and large warm year, and that by and large warmth is greatest on the west slopes. Here's a look at how we fared in terms of precipitation. So it was the third driest water year on record. Of course, not a good position to be in. If we compare ourselves to the surrounding contiguous US, while this dryness did affect our neighbors as well, Colorado was actually the lowest ranking relative to its averages in terms of above or below normal precipitation, with that third driest ranking. The last year this drier was 2018, so it hasn't been that long, and then it hasn't been in the grand scheme of things all that long since our record dry of 2002. Conditions late in the water year really cemented where we see ourselves today in agricultural and ecological drought, with growing concern for our hydrologic systems. You know, when we look at these numbers, sometimes we think about climate trends, and the climate models don't suggest that the long-term average precipitation in Colorado is necessarily getting lower. But when we have our 3 driest years on record in the last 20 years and none of our top 20 wettest years on record, it definitely starts to feel discouraging. Yeah, those wet years, I don't think they're gone forever or anything like that, but we've definitely drawn the short straw more years than not in the last couple decades. If we look at how that dryness breaks out spatially across the state, we see pretty widespread, much below normal precipitation, bottom 10th percentile. That's consistent with a year that statewide was in the bottom 10th percentile. A few pockets of record driest. Again, I wouldn't, pay too much attention to that anomaly in North Park, but it is worth noting that for the North Central Rockies, it really wasn't a bad snow year. We ended the snow year with at or above average snowpack in the areas where we had the largest fires this year, where we set records for new largest wildfire. That looks like a little bit of a head scratcher when you look at a map like this, but I think that once we move into SPIs and see how things progress seasonally, we'll be able to explain what went on there a little bit better. So a little bit of a teaser for just a couple minutes down the road here, a couple slides down the road. Here is a similar month, but looking at just the month of October 2020 for the contiguous US. And we see from this that we were the 52nd warmest October on record, which is near normal. The early part of the month was definitely still warm and dry. Early October is a time when we saw the most rapid expansion of the Cameron Peak fire, and then more mid-month was when we really saw the East Troublesome fire blow up. But then we had a pretty strong cold snap in some areas. It was record-breaking just before Halloween, which is interesting because we had a record cold snap around the same time just last year. So even though temperatures are, warming long-term, particularly in the fall, we've seen more damaging cold snaps to our horticultural and viticultural sectors in late fall in recent years than we have historically. So that's also one of those head scratchers, and I don't have as good an explanation for that as I will for what happened with fires. But again, if we look at the spatial pattern for the state, we see that southwest Colorado was much above normal. Again, a lot of that record warmest territory is in areas where you're high elevation, and so I think this product may be overdoing it a bit, but the southwest portion of the state was certainly warmer than average in October. And then we see that the eastern side of the state was cooler than normal in October, as some of those polar air masses that plunged down into our region were more heavily influenced the eastern part of the state, but the western portion of the state was a little bit more shielded from that. That's pretty typical for some of these cooler air masses that we see, is they'll really plunge down through the plains east of the divide, but the Rocky Mountains will somewhat shield the western part of the state from that cool air. Don't get the wrong idea from this that it didn't get cold in western Colorado, like I was mentioning with the horticultural and viticultural sectors. It did indeed get cold that last week of October, but the front-loaded warm anomalies in the first couple weeks of the month more than made up for that if we look at the month as a whole. Then if we back out to the last 3 full months, August through October, we begin to see the influence of that critically hot weather in August and even into September. East of the Continental Divide, it's amazing how much of a moderating effect just a couple cold snaps had on the temperature over this time frame. The first of those being the snow that we saw early in September that set records in some areas for earliest snow of the year, and the cold snap at the end of October. Those 2 cold snaps had an amazing moderating influence on what we're seeing in these 3-month values. If we look at the month of November to date, we have been on the warmer side of average, this time more on the eastern side of the divide than the western side of the divide. We've had a couple weaker disturbances come through in November that have brought a at least near average start to the snowpack season, which NRCS will talk a little bit more about later. Those disturbances generally came more directly from west to east, so we were on the dry downslope side of things, east of the Continental Divide, which has generally kept us warmer and drier for the month to date. All right, here is our October precipitation rankings. Not off to a start on the right foot in terms of moisture in Colorado, with the 13th driest October on record. The first couple weeks of October were especially dry, and then things got a little bit better. We'll see in the 30-day SPIs in just a minute that over the last 30 days, so the end of October, beginning of November, we're pretty near normal. But when we isolate the month of October and consider just how dry of a start the water year we got off to, we see that it still ended up being a drier than normal October. I think this is one of the most important consequences of this, is that going into next spring, when we think about snowpack and runoff, we have below average soil moisture and below average groundwater. That essentially means that we're probably going to need above average snowpack if we want to see an average runoff year. And then of course we ended the growing season in eastern Colorado with dry soils as well. And so we're going to want to see some sort of a recovery to that, either in winter or spring before green up. So those are things that we're keeping our eyes on. Here is a quick look at the percentage of normal precipitation for the water year to date. Even those more green green yellow, kind of lime green in there, that's the 70th to 90th percentile range. The more mustard color is the 51st to 70th percentile range. So as you can see from this map, most of the state is, again, kind of on the wrong foot for the start of the water year. We have some areas that are near average, but nowhere that's really above average. Then if we look at November for the month to date, like I mentioned, there's been a couple storms that have come through. In the last week, we saw a decent storm up in the northern Rockies. The week before that, we saw a decent storm in the southern Rockies and San Juans. And so we definitely like to see these moisture totals in the mountains in November. It's nice to get that snowpack season started. But as I mentioned previously, east of the Continental Divide, we've primarily just gotten the wind. And if we look at the Arkansas River Valley, it's been nothing at all to start the month of November. All right, now we're going to take a look at the standardized precipitation index on a couple time scales. Just a quick refresher. The standardized precipitation index is basically looking at precipitation accumulations over a certain window and giving us a better idea of how rare those accumulations are in terms of standard deviations away from normal. So the gray dots are right within the normal range. The green dots are a bit above normal, and then the blues and purples is where you get much above normal. The dry side of the scale is designed to match the percentile breaks of the US Drought Monitor. So if you know those well, the yellows are 21st to 30th, the tans are 11th to 20th, the orange is 6 to 10, the red is 3 to 5, and the dark red is 0 to 2. So we see that we were largely in the normal range over the last 30 days. However, if we back out to the 90-day time scale, we see that for many areas, September was dry. Certainly the end of August was dry, and we start to see drier than normal conditions creep up at many of our key weather stations across the state. A couple areas to point out here, we see above normal precipitation in the San Luis Valley. The September snowstorm that rolled through that area, in some areas dropped over a foot of snow with some pretty nice moisture content in an area that's climatologically fairly dry. So those above normal numbers are certainly legitimate. Some other areas are quite a bit on the dry side, like up towards the northern Rockies. We had a really dry end to the growing season, and that's going to be even more prevalent if we back out to the 6-month standardized precipitation index. So this is mid-May through mid-November accumulations, and this is where we start to tell the whole story when it comes to those massive fires that we saw up in north central Colorado. So we had above normal snowpack, sure, but then we had critically dry in some cases the driest summer on record by far. So what you've basically done is you've used that water from snowpack to build up fuels, and then you've dried them out in the summer and left things vulnerable to a larger fire. When we think about the fire season in Colorado, historically, the largest wildfires have started in June in years that had a poor snowpack and an early meltout. So that's the case because June is generally a little bit of a drier month in western Colorado. And if you get an early meltout and a poor snowpack, then you leave a longer window early in the warm season for things to dry out and for severe fire conditions to develop. Prior to the North American monsoon, rising precipitation rates in western Colorado. But this year we had the combination of decent snowpack in the north central Rockies and a complete lack of monsoonal moisture with some of our hottest, driest conditions on record for the north central Rockies. So like I said, we were able to build up those fuels and then really dry them out. That's what a severe fire season more typically looks like in California. So we had more of a California style fire season, which is kind of unsettling and hopefully not a harbinger for things to come. This is the 12-month standardized precipitation index. And again, we can see that most of the state has just been dry. I left in this text from the last time I presented at WATF that our state just as a whole hasn't caught a big break since spring 2019. I think that text really remains true. We've had some storms since then, but we haven't had really the big drought busters like we need in most areas. All right, so now I'll go ahead and take a look at the drought situation. Again, here's what the contiguous US looks like. As you can see, Colorado is experiencing widespread extreme and exceptional drought conditions, and we're not alone in that. We've got friends in the West, so to speak. It was a really tough summer for the Western US as a whole. If we zoom in on Colorado, we see the US Drought Monitor is putting more D4 over the western side of the state than the eastern side of the state. The Arkansas River Valley has been an interesting case through all this in that it really had some nice storms in the July timeframe, but for a lot of the agricultural sector, the reports that we were getting was it was too little too late, and things have again dried out since then. The San Luis Valley is one of the areas in a little bit better shape, and we saw from the SPIs when we looked at the 90-day time scale that things were wetter than average in recent months there. Here's how things have changed over the last month. So you haven't seen many big changes over the last month to the US Drought Monitor. Things are just steadily bad in most places. And then this is a slide showing the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, or EDDI, which measures the effective thirst of the atmosphere, which is not only governed by temperature, but also things like surface humidity, wind speeds, and sunlight intensity. And as we can see from the 3-month Evaporative Demand Drought Index ending recently, we have had record high evaporative demand across much of western Colorado over the last 3 months, again with the fire situation just drying out those fuels. So again, these numbers I think help to explain what we've seen. These numbers are worse by and large than what we see from temperature alone, and so humidity and wind speed both certainly have a role in that. Here is a map of the plant available water in the top 10 centimeters of soil, as well as the top meter. Things have actually improved slightly in terms of soil moisture according to this model over the last month, with near normal precipitation and with temperatures cooling down so that things aren't drawn out of the soils as quickly. These maps that you're seeing here are just showing raw amounts in centimeters. They're not standardized based on time of season. So even if conditions remain bad, if you go into the season where you expect to see a little bit of soil recharge, then you can start to see things get a little bit better. On the next map, I'll show, or on the next slide, I'll show a map of standardized soil moisture anomaly for the top meter. And as you can see, things are still quite bad. The color scale here again is designed to match the US Drought Monitor, and we see a number of areas that are record low. One thing that I do feel inclined to point out is that a number of the record low conditions are at high elevation, and the reason for that is because the recent moisture that's impacted those areas has been snow. So, you know, we're not seeing that in the soil at this time. We're seeing it sort of in a different bank account. But then across much of the eastern plains, things are just dry, and there's no way around that. The dry soils in the high elevations, like I was mentioning, are still important in terms of snowpack and runoff when it comes to next spring. So before we kind of wrap up the water year that we saw and the current conditions, I think we got to talk, of course, about fires. So we have a new record, first, second, and third highest or largest fires on record in Cameron Peak, East Troublesome, and Pine Gulch at 209,000 acres, 194,000 acres, and 139,000 acres respectively. Over the course of the 2020 fire season, we've burned well over 500,000 acres, and when you consider that there's roughly 20 million acres of forest land in Colorado. This is not something that can go on every year. Our office in general has had a lot of questions in 2020 about, is what we're seeing the new normal? And in professional vernacular, not every year will suck like 2020, but of course in a warmer climate, and we do expect to see long-term temperatures continue to warm. The drier years are likely to hurt more. With that, I will, then I just have one more slide showing some of the burn scars for Cameron Peak, East Troublesome, and I think that's the Mullen or Muller fire that's up there mostly in Wyoming. But if you then add in the High Park fire to these statistics, 18% of my home county, Larimer County, has burned since 2012. So pretty remarkable statistic there. With that, I'll go ahead and move into the winter forecast and outlook. We'll start with the near term. So this is the 7-day QPF, or quantity precipitation forecast. The scale is given on the left-hand side of the map. So we see some areas like the San Juans could see decent moisture over the next week. In general, we see a little better moisture over high terrain. That's what we expect now that we're into the cool season. This time of year, the high elevations tend to scavenge the majority of the moisture. The QPF has sort of waffled back and forth as I've been tracking it the last couple days, between bringing a little bit of moisture to the eastern plains and bringing none at all. I think there's an even more recent one than this one that gives a little bit of moisture to the eastern plains, but it won't be much. It'll be pretty scant. These amounts are, they're a little bit on the low side, maybe near average for this time of year. In the Rockies, we like to see these kinds of QPFs every week, with the occasional big week in the Rockies. It's not going to be the next couple weeks. Well, I'll go on to the next slide. Here we're showing the Climate Prediction Center's forecast for the 8 to 14 day time frame. So next Saturday, so the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and the week that follows that, and we see across much of the country increased chance of above normal temperature for our state. That's strongest in the northeast corner of the state, and then we see across much of the central portion of the country increased chance of below normal precipitation. Again, that's they're most confident of that in the northeast portion of the state. What I was wanting to say about this is it doesn't look from the weather models like we're just going to be locked under high pressure and have clear skies, nice weather every single day. It does look like there will be a few disturbances that come through. It just looks like they don't have a lot of moisture with them. So I expect that over the next couple weeks, snowpack will continue to accumulate in the high country, even if it's somewhat lackadaisically. I don't expect it to shut off entirely, and we're likely to see a couple bursts of cooler weather and some wind on the eastern plains, maybe a few skiffs of moisture, but it's likely to a little more likely to warm and dry. I was kind of looking at Thanksgiving for fun, and I don't think it's going to be one of those just super pleasant 65-degree Thanksgiving days. It'll probably be something more like 45, 50, but it's also probably not going to be one of those winter wonderland Thanksgiving days for us in the or on the urban corridor anyways. With that, we can move into more of a seasonal outlook on things. And La Nina conditions are likely to last through the winter. We've kind of developed into this moderate La Nina, and then after winter, things become a little more uncertain. It could fall apart. I think the graphics that I actually have up here are a little bit outdated, where we've already developed a moderate La Nina. So this probability of El Nino, La Nina neutral, we already are in La Nina, is my understanding. And the La Nina, I think we're hanging out kind of in this just below -1 territory on the Nino 3.4 index if we look at sea surface temperatures in the eastern equatorial Pacific. The La Nina could strengthen or deepen a little bit as we get into midwinter, but after that it's likely to start trending towards neutral again. How quickly it trends towards neutral is a little bit less certain. Here is the seasonal outlook for temperature and precipitation that the Climate Prediction Center is going with. This is heavily influenced by, yeah.
Your slide said that the La Nina condition, which might fall apart in the spring, might bode well for Colorado. Were you going to get to that later on, or I was curious what you were suggesting? Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple slides, but the shortened version is, Klaus would say that La Nina in winter and El Nino in spring would be like the ideal combination if you can get that. And I'm not saying we'll get that, but if things do bounce away from La Nina in spring, that would tend to be a good thing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But here is the Climate Prediction Center's outlook for temperature and precipitation across the contiguous US. We can kind of zoom in on Colorado. First, with temperature, we see an increased chance of above normal temperatures across the whole state, but most notably in the southern end of the state. And then for precipitation, we see equal chances or equally clueless in the northern portion of the state. And then by the time we get to the southern portion, there's a slight tilt towards dry. That 40 line, it's not a huge tilt. It's really only a slight tilt. With the temperature forecast, this is definitely influenced by both La Nina and by temperature trends. If it was La Nina alone, we would expect to see above normal temperatures forecast over much of the southwest US, and then below normal temperatures forecast over the northern Great Plains. But then if you embed a trend in that, we can see that it ends up being closer to equal chances over the northern Great Plains and a higher tilt or a higher confidence of above normal over the southwest portion of the US. With La Nina, we tend to have more of a unified polar jet stream that's a little bit stronger, but also tracks a little bit further north. So we see some good winter storms, but they oftentimes are not dipping far enough south for particularly southern Colorado, whereas in an El Nino year, we'd be more apt to see a split jet stream with a weaker polar jet and a stronger subtropical jet that is more likely to sneak some of those four corner cutoff lows into the southwest US that can be big drought busters for the state. Then if we look at the seasonal precipitation outlook, this is consistent with what I was just describing about La Nina. I would say that generally La Nina, El Nino in winter, they might be even overdoing the confidence of dryness a little bit here. Certainly my biggest criticism is that the CPC's forecasts are a bit too blunt in instrument and don't really resolve what we see with our topography. And this is a figure from the Climate Change in Colorado Synthesis Report showing whether El Nino or La Nina trends wetter. And in most seasons in Colorado, El Nino trends wetter basically across the map. But as we get into winter, that December, January, February timeframe, the northern and central Rockies actually are preferred in La Nina for more moisture, where you may not have as many big storms, you may not have the single drought busters that bring up a bunch of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, but you get these consistent in half-inch to inch storms over much of the northern and central Rockies. And so La Nina could be good for those areas. And then sort of along with Tracy's question, if we were to shift from La Nina to El Nino in the spring, El Nino is preferred for wetter conditions in spring, particularly east of the Continental Divide. So if we could manage that combination, that would make me optimistic. But I think what's more likely is we're going to see a moderate to somewhat strong La Nina this winter, and then things will probably trend a little bit more neutral than El Nino in spring. I don't expect that quick a bounce. So with that, I'm just going to take a quick look at what we've accumulated so far and what we might project based on past years for some of our indicator sites around the state of Colorado. We'll start with Fort Collins and work our way counterclockwise around the map back to Boulder. And I'm going to run through these pretty fast because our water year is still very young. And so our projections show us that our water year could end up being about anything at this point. It's still, like I said, very young. But that said, we're definitely hoping for a wet winter, particularly in the mountains, to help us recover from the deficits that have been built up over water year 2020. This is Fort Collins. We had a nice boost in terms of precipitation in late October, where we actually had 14 inches of snow. Other than that, things have been pretty quiet. Steamboat Springs got off to a bit of a slow start. They had a better week last week, but kind of like I was mentioning, it's a bit lackadaisical so far. Grand Junction had one good week, and that's basically all it's been so far. So they're still trending below average. Mesa Verde is much below average for the water year to date after a abysmal water year last year. Alamosa had good moisture in September, which is not even on this graphic, but then again fared pretty well from that late October snow, and so that helps explain the positive 3-month SPIs we saw in the area. Pueblo, it's again that boost in late October, not much else. Walsh is much below normal. Akron, again, quite a ways below normal to start the water year, but it's really the spring and summer that we tend to focus on the most in that area. And then Boulder actually got beaten by Fort Collins in terms of snow accumulation in late October, which is unusual. Usually Boulder gets more snowfall. So Boulder is a little bit on the drier side as well. So a few summary points for where we stand currently. Water year 2020 was largely one we'd like to forget as 12th warmest and 3rd driest on record, certainly with some of the fires that we've seen. The start of water year 2021 was a little bit unsettling, certainly with the huge fire development in October, which is not typically a part of the high fire season for Colorado. That's typically earlier in the season. The cool down at the end of October brought blue skies back to the Front Range. I don't know how bad the smoke was for you folks back in October, but I learned that I really like blue skies. Once the smoke was kind of cleared out, it was certainly a relief to have that back. November to date hasn't been especially atypical. We've seen a pretty normal start to our snow season, but it's definitely leans dry east of the Continental Divide. And with the next several weeks, it's likely to sort of continue in that direction where it won't be completely high pressure, no moisture, but the disturbances that we get will probably be fairly low in moisture, and our snowpack numbers may sort of fall behind a little bit over the next couple weeks. La Nina is, so I didn't update this next bullet point. La Nina is here. I would expect kind of the winners of La Nina to be more northwest Colorado, and the losers more likely to be southeast Colorado is more generally how that goes. But there's quite a bit of uncertainty, so we will see. Above normal moisture is certainly needed to put us back on track by next spring. So with that, thanks. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take a stab at them.
This is Swithin, Peter, and
Hey,
I just
Swithin.
Another excellent job of presenting, as you usually do. On your force on the the wildfire slide, I just wanted to point out, and this is something I actually noticed on the Midwest's drought update yesterday.
Okay.
As far as number 3, the Hayman fire in 2002 was 177,000 acres.
Oh, I thought it was 137. Are you sure of that?
177, yeah. So
I'll
I get on third, but that's something just, I could let it go for the Midwest, but since it's a Colorado presentation, I couldn't allow that.
Well, I don't know. I'm pretty confident in 137. This is something that we might have to settle.
Okay. I'm as being on the Coalition for the Upper South Platte board and being the chairman of that during 2002, 2003, when we were dealing with the recovery of the Hammond fire. I'm pretty confident in my numbers too. It was almost 178,000 acres. But we go with 100.
All right, well, we'll get an update out to the task force on that.
Yeah, just so that
maybe you want to put a beer on it.
Right, just so that poor data doesn't get replicated through the years.
And maybe that's what I'm pretty sure in what I've seen, but it may be that the source that I saw was incorrect. So
yeah, I don't know if they just didn't go back far enough in their search or what have you. The other point I wanted to make was really just an observation that with the way that things look in the entire Colorado River Basin, I think 2020 water year 2020 is going to renew the urgency for avoiding compact calls with a likely good drop in both Powell and Meade through the year. So as for the task group, that's just something we should be aware of. Plan.
Yes, that's an excellent point. I agree.
So, and a good job. I just had to correct what I see as bad data.
Yep, thanks.
You bet.
Yeah, so the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome anyway are 1 and 2, I guess.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see, anything else in the chat?
Doesn't look like it, just some appreciation for the analysis that you presented, so thank you.
Cool, yeah, you bet. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, we'll have to get down to the numbers on the Hammond fire. I was doing a quick Google search as well, finding some discrepancies there. So let's see, next up, I believe is Carl likely on the agenda. Is that right, Ben?
Yes.
Awesome. He's on it. Also, if folks do have questions during presentations, feel free to put them into the chat or jump in and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'd second that. Definitely feel free to jump in at any point, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through. And you guys can see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, just to get started with respect to the fire conversation, if people are curious, miraculously, it seems we only did have one Snowtell site burn in a fire this year. We had 4 or 5 that got extremely close, like some literally right up to the edge of the meadow, or like burned like halfway through the meadow. But we had the Stillwater Creek Snowtell, which was just west of Grand Lake, got burned in the East Troublesome. But fortunately, Forest Service was able to get us in there, and we did get that reinstalled. But just from the on-the-ground observations, it was pretty phenomenal how torched that entire landscape truly was. That was a really incredible fire. I'm sure everyone's aware how fast it really accelerated, but it was really, really wild to see that landscape just completely torched. So we only had the one actual site burn, but it'll be interesting to see over the years the watershed response from all these massive fires that Peter was just discussing. But just thought I'd give that quick update before I got started. But yeah, I'll just kind of run through the usual program and kind of focus more on our early season mountain conditions as well as reservoir storage for what we're seeing so far. So we'll start up in northwest Colorado in the Yampa White and North Platte basins. Again, a lot of this, as Peter touched on, is it's just so early in the season, not much of this can be too telling from a water supply standpoint, but I'll just give updates on where we're at. So up in Northwest Colorado, we are currently very near normal snowpack at 94% of average. And apologies, from working from home, we've been having some challenges updating some of these products. So for instance, all of these graphs don't actually have the November to date bar, but I do have the information on there. And when we get to some of the reservoir products, some of our reservoir products weren't working, so I replaced them with maps. But really across the state, October ended up pretty well below average. Up in northern Colorado is only 45% average. November to date so far has been better, but still below average at just 82%. Here's our month to date precipitation. We're looking at the individual snow-tell sites, and you can see some pretty wide spreads here. Looks like we've got one, might be Arapahoe Ridge at 152% of average, and some down into the 40% of average range. So kind of spatially variable as far as the precipitation throughout November so far. Looking at the water year-to-date precip, sitting at 71%, and in all these graphs, you'll really be able to notice in that bottom left, we're looking at the black trace for this year. Pretty dry through October, and then picking up in kind of the middle part of November there, so evening out to 71% average. So this is where I'd usually have those green bar graphs representing reservoir storage, but I just noticed this morning that apparently there were some issues with the individual running those. So this is our reservoir storage, where you can see 102% of average across the entire basin, and then you can see the point values there. But there's really only a couple reservoirs to speak of in the Yampa and White. Going down into the Colorado, slightly less snowpack, just 90% of the median. I may have said average before, but we're looking at the median here. My apologies for that. But big picture, considering how early we are, pretty on track there. Very similar to its neighbors to the north. October just had 47% of average precipitation. November, very near normal so far at 98% of average to date. Again, here looking at our individual snow-tell sites, generally slightly more consistent than we saw in the Yampa White, but still some variability looking at the individual accumulations. And I really think a lot of these, as we go across the state, are driven by elevation, where the high elevation sites have certainly been receiving more as snow throughout November. Pretty much the same water year-to-date precip as the Yampa White, 72% of average so far, and with pretty much the same temporal pattern as you'll see in that black trace. Pretty much exactly normal reservoir storage going into winter, which is encouraging. Naturally, there's going to be some variability reservoir to reservoir, but it's always a good place to enter winter, right at normal. You can see here, actually I need to move this so I can actually see the right side of these graphs. But pretty sharp pattern of up and down throughout the water year, really mirroring the precipitation patterns it seems, but kind of in the spring there we had well above normal reservoir storage, has really been steadily dropping, but again, it's a good thing that it still is right at average values right now. Oops. Okay, now we're into the South Platte, where most of us are currently residing, I believe. Snowpack, similar to what we've been looking at, 92% of normal, pretty much on track at this point, but still have much to change. And I think I note this in my summary, but it's always an interesting statistic to see where we're at. Is our current snowpack is at 15% of the normal peak value. So we've still got 85% of what it would be a normal accumulation to come. So hopefully we stay on this course, if not better. October precip was slightly better than some of the other ones we've been looking at, 62% of average. November, pretty much normal precipitation across the mountainous areas of the South Platte at 96% of average. Looking site to site here, quite a bit of variability again, much better precipitation values around the South Park area, kind of in the main stem of the South Platte headwaters down there. Couple values above 200% of normal. And it looks to be a bit drier more in the northern front range, but still pretty reasonable values overall. So again, slightly better than some of the other basins, but water year precip is at 79%, kind of averaging out that dry October and then our more recent precipitation accumulations. Looking at reservoir storage, not quite as good as the Colorado, but still across the whole basin, looking at 93% of average total storage, which is not too bad at all. Generally considered pretty near enough to normal to be encouraging going into winter to allow some flexibility depending on how the rest of things pan out. Definitely a very dramatic change in reservoir storage throughout the last water year and a half. You can see last October, there was really strong reservoir storage, really more than we've seen in many years, but it's been pretty much just steadily depleted throughout the water year down to that current value of 93% of average. So moving more into Western Colorado now in the Gunnison Basin. Snowpack is at 80% of average, and again, I'm sure you guys are all aware, but you know, these not only we're early in the season and a lot can change, but when we're looking at only a couple inches of SWE being the normal value, these numbers can be kind of jumpy, and you know that can easily just change with one storm. But currently 80% of the normal value. Down in Western Colorado, October was even drier than other parts of the state at a very meager 26% of average October precip. November to date was 106 so far, so things are picking up. But as you saw in some of that drought information and a lot of things Peter presented, definitely been very dry there. And most of the information we present is just based on the water year, but also, as Peter mentioned, and I think a huge part of the story to keep in mind is really how extremely dry the summer was. And I'll touch base on this at the very end, but how that's affected soil moisture and a few other things. So this is our November to date precipitation summary. A little more consistent around the basin than other places we're looking. It looks like kind of the west end up on the Grand Mesa and over on the Uncompahgre Plateau have been still remaining some of the drier areas, but otherwise relatively consistent accumulations at our snow-tell sites in the Gunnison. So again, getting down into the drier part of the state, water year to date precipitation is down at just 59%. So hopefully these coming storms and the rest of the winter will help improve that. Reservoir storage in the Gunnison is 72% of normal, and you know, one of the big ones here, Blue Mesa, looks as at 65% of normal values, and then pretty variable from there. But yeah, 72% average across the basin, and as we would expect. You can see a slight blip, a little increase during snow melt this year, and has been depleted pretty dramatically ever since that springtime snow melt ended. Down to our combined southwest basins, excuse me. Snowpack is currently looking a little bit better there at 107%. Sorry, I'm having a quick technical difficulty here. But you can see here is that really some big storms came in right in the middle of November. Very sharp increase there, and it's been dry, but hopefully that'll keep continuing. 1 second, excuse me. Okay. So very similar to the Gunnison, extremely dry through October, very little precipitation to speak of, just 22% average. And then November has picked up There was that big increase in the graph, but it's still just 109% of average. So nothing to really write home about, and still have a lot of recovery to do from the previous really dry months. Looking spatially here, again, I think I'd have to look closer, but at a glance, I think a lot of these differences are likely driven by elevation of sites, but we've got some low 24 to 46% of average precipitation, but all the other ones are above normal. Again, this is Columbine Pass up here in the north. It's a 68 that we saw that we use for both the Gunnison and the San Miguel there. So looking at water year-to-date precipitation, just 60% of average. So much to look forward to. Reservoir storage, excuse me, very similar to the Gunnison, overall 76% of average across the basin. Quite a bit of variability there, but not a terrible situation compared to some of the years we've seen in the recent past. 76% isn't terrible, at least, but still hoping for a good winter. And we can see again basically at the beginning of this water year, shortly before it, we were pretty well above normal, kind of at values that we hadn't really seen since about 98. There's several years that were very similar, but pretty high values, and really has been extremely depleted, and you really can't see much of an increase at all from the snow melt there. It kind of flatlined for a bit and it's just been depleted throughout the rest of the summer. Over in the Rio Grande, they got a little bit more increases to the snowpack in October than we've seen in other basins, melted out, and then that another big boost there in November. But currently, relative to normal, I believe this is the best snowpack in the state. I may be mistaken, but I believe that at 145% of normal, sitting pretty good, but still much to come. October precip did a lot better than the Gunnison and those other combined Southwest basins. It got 63% of average, not great, but still better than other parts of the state. And November has been pretty good at 128% of average so far. Looking spatially, there's definitely some more considerable spatial patterns here where you can see in the more western portion of the basin, in the eastern San Juans there, a lot of sites having well above normal precip, above 150% of average. But over in the Sangres, been much drier. So a lot more spatial patterns across different parts of the Rio Grande than we've seen. And that really does have a big impact on how that actually influences the long run stream flow with how they end up in the main stem. It looks like we had a little hiccup here in the calculation of percent of normal, but it looks like it's probably about 90% of normal. And if anyone would like me to follow up on that, I can certainly get that info. But looking at the graph, slightly below normal, still sitting better than a lot of the other basins that we've looked at so far. Reservoir storage is on the low end. I believe it is the lowest in the state currently at just 68% of average. It looks like some of the ones up in the headwaters here are doing a lot better. And then kind of more south and east, the reservoirs are doing a lot lower. But again, these graphs or this map is just showing the individual percent of normal. But when we calculate the basin wide, we're looking at just total volume. So, you'd have to track down the individual storages to see how that volume actually affects it, because some of these may be smaller, some bigger. This is one of the few in the state that actually did see a larger boost later in the season. So kind of dropped throughout the water year and then had a slight boost. So it was lower, but still not necessarily in the best position going into the winter on the lower end of any storages across the state. So our final major basin we look at is the Arkansas. And similar to the Rio Grande and dissimilar to much other parts of the state, actually did get a boost, got a little bit of snow there in late October, and then a little bit less than its neighbors to the west here through the middle of November, but currently sitting at 93% of normal snowpack across the Arkansas. October precip did on the better end of any basin in the state at 73% of average. And so far in November, at exactly normal values, we've received 100% of average November to date precipitation. Spatially here, again, if you look at the very bottom of the map, these are sites just on the other side of the basin divide from the Rio Grande. So these southern sangres have really been kind of deprived of some of these recent storms, just 35 and 40% of average month to date. And then moving further up north, more into the headwaters, definitely a lot better, looking at pretty much all above average precipitation values over the last 3 weeks. So at the end of the day, our water year precipitation is 82% of average across the Arkansas. Reservoir storage doing pretty good overall, 96% of average. Again, near normal is always a good position to be in going into winter to hopefully be able to adjust for whatever happens with our snowpack come springtime. And here, there's not as much of a dramatic decline in reservoir storage throughout the water year as we saw in other basins, which was just good. Then a kind of a slight increase there at the end. So looking at statewide values, again, very, very early in the season, much to come, but still not a bad position to be in at 99% of normal snowpack statewide. And in the big picture, relatively consistent. The upper Rio Grande there is looking the best at 145%. Gunnison on the low end at just 80%, but realistically, average across the snow tells, we're looking at, a difference in maybe an inch or two of snow water equivalent. So a lot can really change with just one storm this time of year. And again, very near normal snowpack statewide. Yeah, in some of our products, there are some slight differences in the calculations we're actually trying to work through. So the last one said 99, but this says 100% of normal. Statewide October precipitation looking pretty meager, as we've seen, at just 46% of average. And November to date, excuse me, is 102% of average. So back to normal values, and hopefully we can continue to maintain that course. And hopefully some of those long-term climate outlooks end up being more favorable for us than they're currently looking. Statewide month-to-date precipitation, no huge spatial patterns here. As I mentioned, I think a lot of this November precipitation has been driven by snow. So really across the entire state and all the basins, you see quite a smattering of different colors there that have kind of evened out. But that's kind of to be expected this time of year with some of the higher elevation sites receiving more snow. Statewide precipitation on the year-to-date scale is 72% of average, as you can see there. Again, on the water year scale, some bigger differences, but generally kind of drier in southwest Colorado, in the Gunnison and those combined southwest basins coming out of the southern San Juans there, and a bit higher in eastern and northern Colorado, but still not that fantastic so far. Here's our statewide reservoir overview. Again, you can see low in the Rio Grande here, 68% of average storage. And the highest is in the Yampa White, which realistically has very little storage. 102% of normal, 100% in the Colorado. And that's leading to 82% of average storage across the entire state. And this shows it again. Unfortunately, this time series chart isn't the most exciting when we only have 1 month so far, but kind of just reiterating what we saw on the map there. And here's looking at our long-term time series again. At the beginning of the water year, we were doing pretty good. Similar peaks, it looks like in 2016-17, 2014-15, So we're sitting at a pretty good level going back to about 2000, the beginning of the water year, but pretty substantial declines. And you can really just see there's only that small blip in storage from our snowmelt runoff. So here's our surface water supply index. Really pretty variable across the state. And you know, this is, I believe, largely based on reservoirs at this point. I always forget that. But short story is really variable surface water supply index. And again, we're really just looking forward to see what winter holds for us at this point and see how things pan out come April. So this last slide is kind of related. I really wanted to bring this up related to some of the drought things and soil moisture conditions that Peter had touched on. So this is the percentile ranking of the last 3 months of observed stream flows across the state. So basically what this is showing is extremely low base flow conditions once the snowmelt runoff ends. That stream flow base flow can be a correlation, or can have a correlation to soil moisture conditions. But we can see here in southern Colorado, we're basically looking at the lowest fall stream flows on the period of record. And many of these are going back 100 years or commonly more. But really across the state, I don't know if there's any observed stream flows above the 20th percentile. Really low stream flows, and that does indicate very dry soils. And as Peter mentioned, there's strong concern that, well, regardless of concern or not, it's definitely going to take a substantial snowpack to achieve normal stream flow values next summer. We're definitely expecting those really dry soils to just have to absorb quite a bit of that snowmelt before it actually makes it through the stream channel. So similar to last year, and there has been talk that it could even be worse, that a near normal snowpack could likely result in well below normal stream flows. So when it's commonly expected that a normal snowpack would result in normal stream flow values, as we're going through looking at the snowpack and the forecasts, I think that's something that's extremely important for folks to recognize, that we are anticipating there to be a much larger gap than normal between observed snowpack and what results in that spring and summer stream flow runoff. So again, big picture summary, I think this is all pretty well established at this point, but October precipitation well below average across the state. November has been near normal, but still leaving a deficit on the water year to date. Reservoir storage in several basins is pretty near normal, but well below normal, particularly in southwest Colorado, with the statewide being 82% of average reservoir storage. Snowpack, very near normal levels right now, but again, we're only at about, I believe, I mentioned it for one basin, but I believe statewide we're only at 15% of what would be the normal peak value in mid-April. So much to come there. And again, I think one of the most important stories to tell right now when we're looking at the relation of how our snowpack pans out compared to our summer stream flows is those very low fall base flows do indicate very dry soils. So we're expecting a big discrepancy in what we would see just in the percent of normal snowpack compared to our spring and summer stream flows. So very important for folks to keep in mind as we move through the winter. And that's all I have. Excuse me, if anyone had any questions.
Okay, any questions for Carl or some? Maybe not. I don't see who's trying to talk. But if you want to type into the chat, you're welcome to. You're having there's a little bit of feedback. might be on yours, Carl.
Okay, let me.
I don't know.
One.
Ben, can you pull up the agenda? I have it here on my computer. One, thank you, Carl, for that report. I know it's a little strange being at the beginning of the water year for some of those graphs, but it's helpful nonetheless. So next we have on the agenda the reports from water providers and impact task forces in discussion, and then a discussion about drought plan activation. So I want to contextualize a little bit before we jump into the round robin from water providers. You know, we all know why we're here. We just saw kind of the reports and writing in the sand, I guess. I would love to hear, if we do the round robin updates, just a summary of maybe internal level of concern or just any sort of initial needs for the winter to better prepare for the potential year to come. I want to make sure that we do have enough time for a good discussion around plan activation and next steps. So if we could keep those kind of short and focused on what needs you all might have, or rather what kind of primary concerns you have, so we can address those in discussion, then we can just fold right in. So who wants to take the first stab? We got Isabel, do you want to start us off? I just picked the name on whoever replied first. Swithin?
Yes.
Go for it, you're unmuted.
For Centennial, just grateful that the 2020 irrigation season finally ended at the end of October. Started in April and it was brutal. We were up probably 10-15% above average this year. So really the good news is that has ended finally. We are about 25% below in our storage where we normally are this time of year. And my biggest concern at this point, other than hopeful for a at least normal snowpack, biggest concern is high demands early in the spring with all the dry soils and the impact that will have, again, irrigation demand, the impact that will have on our reservoirs in the early spring in the March, April, May timeframe. That's where we can really see some negative effects for us there and get behind for the rest of the year. I think that's it, unless somebody has questions.
All right, who wants to take next?
This is Isabel. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I started talking earlier and didn't realize I was still on mute. So our reservoirs are doing okay. We had some operational kind of special operations this fall just for maintenance purposes, but similarly, it's certainly dry. We're certainly going to keep a close eye on snowpack this year to make sure that we can refill our reservoirs in the spring. But I think, as Swithin said, we're kind of going into the winter anticipating that we might, we'll have to keep an eye on demands as, through the winter and then into early spring, depending on how people start using water before the hot season starts up again.
Okay, thank you. How about Northern Water? Emily, you on?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're pretty focused on the fires right now and the impacts of those, including water quality and also the timing and amount of runoff. So that's one concern we have, and like everyone else, we're hoping for a good snowpack with these dry summer and fall conditions.
Thank you. Let's see. Who else? Just feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not organizing this very well at the moment.
I'll take it on, Megan. This is Jason Feinhout with Denver Water.
Hey, Jason.
Hi. So for us, we are at about 6% down from our normal reservoir level. Normally we're at 85% full. Right now we're at 79. So for us, you know, that's still okay for now. Just like everyone else, it's a wait and see for us to look at snowpack and then eventual runoff, and just kind of waiting for that. In the meantime, we've got our internal water shortage preparedness committee meeting pretty regularly, and just kind of planning for different scenarios into the spring. Ideally, yeah, you know, we won't have to do anything because we'll have a great snowpack, but we are ready for various levels of restrictions if we need to. And I wanted to just say, I'm really excited about this municipal drought task force idea that you're bringing up. We would certainly love to see something like that. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. John, do you want to go for Thornton?
Yeah. Let's see. Production is just under 11% above 2019. And yeah, we had a gangbuster year for people using water. I'm not sure about revenue. Our storage is sitting at 80%, which is good and right about normal for this time. Stanley Lake itself is at 30,990 acre feet, and we're currently diverting off Clear Creek with Croak Call, so it's winter fill time. And the one thing of note, of course, we watched the drought settle in, and we have activated our interdepartmental drought implementation team. How's that for a name? And we're currently meeting monthly and looking at drought conditions. Storage is just fine, so everything is dependent on the snowpack like everyone else. And that's it.
Thanks. That is quite a name, and I'm used to cumbersome names. Let's see. How about Brennan with Broomfield? If you'd like to provide an update, or Chris, if you would like to provide an update from Eagle River.
Sure, happy to jump in.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're doing all right up here. Our reservoirs are doing pretty well, all things considered. We're up here at the headwaters, so it's a little bit easier, less need for downriver flows, so to speak. We did use some of our reservoir for conservation flows, and we're part of a test to see how we could get a little peak surge down to Utah, actually this end of the water year. So all things are pretty good. We are really preparing for a very dry season because we're trying to be as proactive as possible up here in the headwaters. And we are actually discussing already what are our next steps if we need to start really communicating with our customers, or if we need to really start cutting back in general to ensure that this area is not too dried out with all the wonderful information that we all are very, very well informed on now. So appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. How about some of our partners, Mile High Flood District? Kevin, do you have an update you'd like to share? And if you are on mute, there is an extra step, *6, if that is something that you're dealing with. That sometimes works. Are there other folks that have provider updates would like to jump in? No. Okay. Okay, so thanks for those quick summaries. Back just on November 10th, so a little over a week and a half ago, there was a drought task force meeting with the, that's the director level group that just gets updates once a month on drought conditions and the discussions of this group, as well as reports from the agricultural impact task force that has been activated all summer. Basically presented the current conditions and what we know of the 2021 outlook, really covering the low stream flows that Carl touched on, where we're at with reservoir storage, La Nina conditions, one of the biggest concerns being just soil moisture statewide, and then the realities of global temperature, that 2020 is still on track to be the warmest year on record. There's some long lead outlooks for 21 showing really another unshakably hot year for the West next year. So we reviewed what the options are, and right now everyone knows we're at phase 2 for the drought plan, which is really a solid place to be, but there are some indicators that have been hanging out in that phase 3 indicator range. Not all of them. There are not crystal cut reasons, why we should or should not move into phase 3 at this point. And so mostly want to open that discussion. It was proposed to the drought task force and discussed amongst CWCB and DNR leadership that a recommendation would be to move into phase 3, knowing, what the outlooks are, and especially what the soil conditions have been all year, and setting ourselves up for a similar, even if we hit average snowpack, a fairly below average stream flow conditions. There is a component of phase 3 in the drought plan that is a drought emergency declared by proclamation of the governor. That does not necessarily have to happen with phase 3. That could be almost like a, wait for the spring to do that and raise a presidential declaration when things are more, urgent and we need like more of that activated attention. I am really open to ears. I talked, Peter shared some thoughts on when the right timing is to move into phase 3. But I think more importantly, I've heard a need for a municipal task force to have our water providers in communication with one another, both to like share, where they're at and what kind of levers they have, but also to communicate over the winter what kind of resources they might need from the state or from each other. So mostly interested in opening that line of communication and facilitating those conversations for whatever entities would like to engage and have support with their fellow water providers in the state. So I would like to generally open up conversation around a need for a municipal, like essentially communications group for drought coordinators to be in touch with each other, and any benefits or really like drawbacks that you see from moving into phase 3, because we do have justification to do that right now, and it's more trying to sort out whether that decision needs to be like very timely or lined up with spring conditions. So I know it is somewhat of a political decision, but trying to not make that something that we hold out on if it would help people activate throughout the winter. Does that make sense, folks? I know I can't see any of your faces, so please feel free to unmute and I can just call on folks that I see turn green. And Tracy, I don't know if you have any thoughts that have evolved since we last talked, or insights that you want to share.
I don't, Megan.
Okay. How about this? I'll propose, oh, John, go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of ambivalent on moving it to phase 3, but I remember in 2002 where, although I wasn't in the water business then, I remember reading how everybody felt, the municipal providers and others felt blindsided by the drought. And I think when you come right down to it, that's kind of the purpose of this group, is to make sure that people know the severity of the drought when it's timely. And you know, everybody's waiting for snowpack, but nothing really indicates that we're going to have a great snowpack. And then having a municipal drought group, communications group, is a great idea. Up on my neck of the woods in Thornton, we have all these little municipalities. Thornton's a big one, but we have other municipalities that we share boundaries. And so our customers get confused when one municipality, you know, imposes restrictions and another one doesn't. So I think a coordinated message would be great.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that insight. Swethan, did you have some thoughts? You were unmuted. Go ahead.
I was trying to think of when our next task force meeting was, and it's January, is that correct? We skipped December. And I'm just wondering if we will know more in January. So my thought would be to postpone the activation until then, unless there's some time limitation that would prevent things from getting ramped up by March, which is really when measures for drought would probably be taken. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does make sense.
And that kind of, you know, if we always have to be careful of getting a message out to the public or to legislators, those kind of things that, oh, we have a problem, and then trying to reel it back in later, as well as everything else going on in the news right now. It'd probably get buried anyhow, but I don't know at the agency level what kind of steps would be started by, what actions would be started by making the declaration now versus in January.
Right. Yeah. So what this conversation comes down to, in my mind, is really about the timing of communication and what is helpful for all of our providers and our producers as far as media attention and you know, raising concerns. There will be a drought, just a short drought report that's prepared for the legislative session that the agricultural impacts task group will be reviewing, and I will be sending to all of you as well for review. That is just mostly a summary of this year and our concerns and recommendations for next year. So we could maintain the, you know, phase 3 as something to reconsider at our next meeting. I would propose that we get the municipal task group together so that we have time to just organize and coordinate who's interested and make sure that we have those supporting conversations that aren't too late down the line.
Sounds good.
Hey, Megan, Jason Feinhout. Hey, I think you hit it just right on the head there. The idea of the municipal task force is really key for us. I mean, obviously, all utilities will move forward at the speed that they individually want to, but I think it is imperative to have a coordinating body where we all know what everyone else is doing, especially all of us utilities along the Front Range in these kind of packed together municipalities. If one of us moves quicker than others are ready for, a lot of times our customers don't necessarily know where they are, who they're with, and so it's just good to coordinate, and especially to coordinate before you guys decide to elevate. So I am 100% for this idea of the municipal drought task force as soon as possible.
Thanks. It is something that I'm learning honestly on the fly this year in this role, which is how much weight does the phase of the drought, the state plan have on local and regional activation. I do not want to be in a position where, if the state would have activated earlier, it would have started a chain reaction that is more proactive. I'd like to believe that a lot of our municipalities have just more autonomy than that, but if it is something that would be helpful, that is the goal, and not to just raise alarms, at a random time. It would be more to help jumpstart internal conversations if that is something that a local or a regional entity is waiting for.
Hey Megan, this is Becky. Out of curiosity, when was the last time that the phase 3 was activated? Do you know?
I should have that ready, but it was, I want to say that it was 2018 for a brief period of time. And I need to pull that up. And I have it somewhere in my notes. I don't, Tracy, do you remember if that was 2018?
Sorry, Megan, I'd have to look back at the documents.
Okay. It's a good question, Becky, that I should be able to rattle off, and I cannot.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the
spot. No, that's okay.
And I'm just going back to, simplicity of numbers, and this is certainly not to pick on you. I know that you are newly navigating this role right now, but it seems like we are overdue to go into phase 3. If I were to simply look at the way this drought is depicted over the entire state, and almost 75% of the state is in a D3, D4 drought, and really the only saving grace is that the water supply is still there, but there's no room for error. So, to Swithin's point, I don't know if waiting till January would be harmful, but also to the point of, there's not a lot of hope that this is going to go away before we get to next spring. So, in my mind, it probably should have been like, maybe we should have already been in phase 3, back in like October or something, and we're not. So is it appropriate to do it now? Because it's, better to do it now that we're talking about it, or does it make more sense till January? I don't know. But just a reminder that right now, as it stands, 74% of the state is in a D3 or D4, and we haven't really had that level across our state since like 2012, 2013. I don't even think it was that widespread with the 2018 drought.
Yeah, I actually had for historical context for the drought task force, that the last time the state experienced 25% D4 and 50% D3 was February 2013. And the last time 100% of the state was in drought was 2012 to 2013. So just to back up a bit, I did propose to the drought task force very clearly a recommendation to move into phase 3, and essentially have had 2 weeks to sit on that decision. And I would say a far majority of those I've talked to have supported moving into phase 3 based on conditions alone and where we're at. And so I was really looking for that feedback today on, I don't think there's any major cons to moving into phase 3 now. I did just want to hear if there are like decisions that are hinging on, at a local level, decisions that are hinging on the phase of the state. And that is something that I'm like learning in real time of whose, drought activation steps incorporate waiting or looking at the state phase. Ben, did you find the report? It's too small, I can't see. if that's what you're doing, we can all see laserfish, which is great.
Megan, I did want to. Okay, sorry.
Go ahead. Was that Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in to kind of apologize if you feel like you're getting a mixed signal from our office, since what Becky and I advised didn't really match up. I probably should have coordinated with them before responding to you in your email. I agree with everything she said, that, you know, if we look at the severity of 2020 versus 2018, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for 2020 to not be phase 3, but for 2018 to be phase 3. I guess my only worry was, let's say we do have a good snowpack, then having the governor declare disaster after the fires are done, and then in March being like, whoops, it could look a little bit silly. But, you know, I'm not real attuned to how these disaster declarations work.
Right.
And like Becky said, I think that the deck is probably more stacked against us when it comes to you know, being in a situation where we're not thinking about drought in April versus being in a situation where we're very concerned about drought in April.
Right. Yeah, and for the record, like, the reason we have this meeting is to have these conversations. Like, you all are experts in this world, and that's why this is a discussion item and not a just update from me. So I appreciate all the input, and I guess I am personally, you know, just trying to take in all the information that I'm hearing from folks, and feeling like there is more benefit to a proactive message around the intensity of 2020, the intensity of our fire season, and honestly, the kind of grave reality of the outlook for 2021. And I would rather hinge on being in a heightened state of alert in preparation than doing this weird, like, we only activate once things are already chaotic. You know, I would rather downgrade to phase 3 if we have like an incredible winter, or sorry, downgrade to phase 2 if we have an incredible winter, and that still leaves us in an activated state, but not at like alert, like everyone needs to be scenario planning for the conditions that we're looking at. So this is thinking out loud. Swithin, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think Becky made some very good points there. Majority of us on the task force and on this call, we look at things through the lens of our municipality. I think she is correct on especially agricultural and wildfire ecological effects. I would change my vote to going ahead and activating to level 3 at this time.
Thank you for that.
And follow up to that, I guess one of my questions about activation is, you know, is the activation of these phases, does it have a very hydrologic focus, or is it more of a general drought focus? Because one of the things that I've been consistently saying throughout 2020 is, you know, the reason the drought monitor looks the way it does is we're entrenched in quite severe agricultural and ecological drought, just like Swithin just said. If the purpose of it, you know, if the purpose of this phase 2, phase 3 kind of activation revolved solely around water supply, I do think that we're sitting in a little better position on that arm of drought, largely due to good planning on the part of people in this room and others, as well as based on carryover storage from 2019.
That makes sense, and I do think that the phase that we're in is more than meteorological drought. It is, you know, based on, and the reason that there's so much flexibility between these phases, and you know, just indicators are not hard lines, they're, you know, signposts, is because we have such variability in how people are impacted. And I think one of my biggest concerns of 2020 that I've heard is the intensity that the agricultural sector has felt this drought on the heels of 2018, because there was no room for recovery truly, and to have another year on top of that will be very intense for much of our state.
Hey, Jason Feinhat again. You know, Denver Water specific, we don't necessarily align exactly with state levels as far as if you elevate to a certain level, we do certain things. But one of our, you know, things that we look at, our indicators, is what level the state is at. So it definitely plays a part. But also the idea of helping with the communications of we're in a different situation than we have been in, you know, over the last couple of years is helpful. So I would definitely vote for the increase as well.
Okay, there's several folks we haven't heard from on the phone. Just want to make sure we have some open silent time for others to step in if you have thoughts. And thank you, Jason. Can call out Kevin, who always has the shiniest of outlooks. Kevin Hauk. See. Tracy, I would love your feedback here. I think where we're landing on is maybe where we started, which is the recommendation to move into phase 3 and activate a municipal task force for just early scoping, not really specific needs, but to begin those conversations. And the governor receives, you know, a Saturday memo where I've already had conversations with Amy Moyer, who said, you know, he could review this as early as Saturday. And I think after having the Drought Task Force meeting back on the 10th and today, just wanting to confirm where we're at, that we could in reality activate this at the beginning of next week. Do you feel comfortable with that, Tracy?
Yeah, I think that's the consensus here. And I heard some hesitation, I think at least from Swithin, about like any kind of major communications out or out of the activation or that presidential request. And I think even with these the activation to phase 3 and the municipal impact task force, we need not make any big PR statements about this. I think it was a good comment that it's maybe a little early about requesting action or a lot of help maybe from the federal government, but to get the coordination going, I think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thanks. And there are plenty of reasons to wait for any sort of like federal proclamation, right, until next year. Okay, so in summary, we'll send out, we will send to the governor a memo to, it's really just an update of an existing memo. So it's like an addendum that we will move the drought plan into phase 3 and activate conversations between water providers. And we will not be requesting a federal or presidential drought declaration at this time, but that is something that we'll reserve for evaluation in the spring. Thank you everyone for your input and for just like recognizing that this is time for discussion, and that's why we have these calls. So that's all I have, and I think, I mean, you all will be notified. Though the other follow-up that you'll see in the next 2 weeks is that 1 to 2 page summary for the legislative session that's going to be reviewed at the Agricultural Impacts Task Force meeting on December 3rd. So I still need to kind of rework the comments we've gotten there, but I would like to circulate that with this group as well for review and thoughts. And that's really a snapshot, not super detailed, but just to make sure that in the ledge session that drought and wildfire are coordinated messages, and we understand as a state that those things are really connected our intense wildfire season is because of intense drought. So making sure that that is on everyone's mind is the goal, with no outright like legislative actions being recommended. So I release thee into your Friday afternoon. Thank you for this call and adapting to the change in time as well.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
And Ben.